backstory on this particular thing. At the end of last semester, a couple of students threw up the idea of an Ask Me India, an Ask Mr. Andoscia Anything, video. And I thought, oh, why not? That sounds like fun. I'd never done that before. So I figured we'd set it up. I sent out a survey, and I got about a half a dozen, actually fairly decent questions. So I figured I'd do that now. Of course, the semester ended. There was grades to do, and then there was catching up after doing. I mean, it's been a long year. So I'm just now getting around to it, and I got a brand new camera, so I want to test my camera out. I don't know exactly how to use it right now, but there's a little red light flashing, so I assume that means I am recording. So let's do this then. So the goal is I'll get the questions up on the screen, go through them. Some of them are pretty serious, some of them are kind of funny, and try to go through this a little bit as quickly as I can. Although you guys know me, I do tend to get a little bit verbose. So here we go. My stand on Black Lives Matter and LGBTQ movements, women's movements, things along those lines, I am a dedicated supporter of these movements. Any social movement that is dedicated to improving the lives of people overall in democratic ways is something that I'm going to get behind. When we take a look at like Black Lives Matter and we see, 400 years worth of oppression. And as a sociologist that I know and I understand that this oppression isn't just the result of, just a few racist people who make life miserable for everybody, and especially for people of color. That's not what it's about. This is about structural and institutionalized racism that exists at the core of our very society. I'm not going to go into the weeds on this. I'm a sociologist. We understand the structural nature of these concepts and how they influence and manipulate everybody in ways that don't benefit anyone. Yes, we can make the argument that institutionalized racism benefits white people at the expense of black people and people of color. Absolutely, that certainly is the case. But when you actually look at the aggregate, when you actually look at these things from a global perspective, a social perspective, what you see is nobody benefits. This takes away, this robs us all of everything. And one of the things that I think is important about the Black Lives Matter movement is that the reforms that Black Lives Matter would like to put into place. That's not to say that they're all in agreement on everything, but the idea of creating a non-violent, non-racist, non-subservient interaction between the police and the communities that they serve isn't just going to benefit, ultimately, if it's put in place, isn't just going to benefit people of color in those communities, but it will make life better for police officers who are supposed to serve those communities. It will be safer for them and safer for people in the community overall if we can address the racist structures that exist in that relationship between police and the communities. And this is also true with regard to LGBT communities. This is true with regard to women. Everybody. One of the things that we know in sociology is everybody's life improves when you improve the lives of particular groups in democratic ways. So that leads to the second part of the question, which has to do with my particular politics, and this is one of those areas where when people ask me about it, I actually feel pretty good because I fear that sometimes my biases are pretty obvious. I don't do a lot. I try to be as objective as I can, but I'm not objective, and there are things that I really care about, and I think that shows. So when I get asked, I think that's great, because that must mean that I'm not being as blatantly obvious in the classroom as I fear that I am. But so I get the question. Well, is this left? Are you to the left? Well, kind of obviously. And you know, are you a Democrat? Are you a socialist, a Marxist? Especially since I talk about Marx a lot. You know, are you a Marxist? I'm not a Marxist. But you know, one of the things that I try to say is, look, I don't like to subscribe. I've always been weary of subscribing to particular groups. And the reason for that is, I actually didn't know what the reason was until I started, studying sociology, and realized that when you participate, when you become a member of a group, you join a group, what ends up happening is you end up becoming beholden to that. You know, it's automatic. That group becomes incorporated into your identity, and you become an integral part of the group, which sometimes leads to some distorted thinking. It sometimes leads to, my willingness to excuse the negative elements of my group membership and emphasize the positive, and to identify an out-group for which I am going to not excuse the negative and de-emphasize the positive. And I don't want to do that. And now I'm a sociologist, and I know why I don't want to do that. So I always refer to myself, when it comes to politics, I try not to say, yes, I am a socialist, or I am an anarchist, or I am a Democrat, or I am a whatever. I usually try to give the answer that I am a small d Democrat. In other words, I try to break my politics down into some core principles that I really believe in, that are going to motivate my activism. And what were those? And what they are really is democratic processes. I believe more democracy is better than less democracy. I believe that the more democratized the society is, politically, economically, socially, culturally, the better it is for everybody. I've not seen any evidence to suggest that that's not true. So, but what that requires, of course, is that people have a democratic, walk into these democratic systems with a democratic mindset. So how do we build that? How do we build that mindset? And I think in order to create kind of the democratic utopia, small d democratic utopia that I have in my mind, will probably take generations and generations to do. And so every step that I take is a step toward that, toward a world that I'll almost certainly never live to see. But maybe somebody's grandchildren will. So I've been involved in activist politics for a long time. I try to instill in my students the importance of actively participating in the political process. Popular participation in the political process, the 4 Ps, popular participation in the political process. Even those students who don't necessarily agree with me politically, it doesn't matter. I want them to participate. I want them to go out and say their piece, because I believe in democratic processes, and that means that you need to have a marketplace of ideas full of all of these ideas competing with each other and bouncing and knocking the rough edges off of each other in order to develop something that's workable. And that's a conversation that needs to continue to happen over and over and over again before you can actually create the world that you want to create. And then you're always in this constant process of creation. So I started off in late high school, early college, getting involved in free speech movements. Free speech is a big deal for me. And then later on, I got into, teen advocacy, criminal justice, things like that. I was big into environmentalism. For a while there, I was a member of the local Sierra Club board. I was the president of a local environmental group. But since then, I've been involved in more movement politics. I participated in the peace movement a number of times, going all the way back to college in the first Gulf War. I participated in the peace movement with regard to Afghanistan, the Iraq War. etc. I mean, I was involved in protesting for immigration rights. There's just I've been involved in a lot of stuff, and continue to be involved in a lot of stuff and write a lot of stuff. So if anybody really wants to know where I stand politically, you can go to the Mad Sociologist blog. Everything is right there, and you can see where I stand. uh, Oh, what to tell you, if you fail my economics class, hang your head in shame. I don't know. I mean, I let you redo assignments, retake tests. I give extra credit. Um, I don't know what to tell you. My suggestion is talk to your guidance counselor and take it again. There's nothing else to say on the subject, really. Oh, wow. So, yeah, I get this question a lot because I teach sociology. So I get a lot of students who ask me, um, "What direction are we going in? Are we getting, you know?" It's sure many of my students seem to feel that we're going in the wrong direction, and to a certain extent they may be right. Look, as a historian, as a sociologist, I take more of a broad view of this stuff. And one of the things that I can tell you is that society doesn't move in a particular direction. It is not history doesn't serve human interest. There is this myth of historic progress, um, and to a certain extent, it's sustainable, right? We can kind of point and say, hey, look, I'd much rather be alive today than say 100 years ago or 200 years ago, right? Um, just in any metric that you could probably look at, this is probably the time to be around, right? Even if we just look at technology and look at the fact that, hey, we're facing a major pandemic, but overall, it hasn't really been that bad if we compare that to pandemics that have hit us in the past. We have science, we have reason, we have a mass means of communication and communicating strategies all over the country, all over the world, simultaneously for dealing with this pandemic. And we have scientific methods for dealing with this pandemic to the point where within just a few short months, we're actually putting out vaccines. Um, you know, now that's really pretty impressive when you stop and think about it. So there's many things that we can say about our time today, and say, wow, this is so much better than we've ever had it. Um, and I think we got to be careful because one of the downsides to our mass media culture is it's a capitalist mass media, so they have to sell advertising space, and bad news sells advertising space, and keeping people afraid means that people will, click the remote and dial in and watch your advertisements. So our news media goes with "if it bleeds, it leads," which gives us this impression of being in this constant state of warfare. And in fact, that's just simply not the case. That's just simply not the case. You're much safer today than you would have been actually even when I was a kid, as far as being victimized by crime or whatever. You're in a much better position now than you've ever been in. The likelihood of dying in wars right now. There's a lot of things that are going on right now that are huge improvements over the way things used to be. So in that regard, that our direction does seem to be positive. On the other hand, there are ongoing debates in our society about democracy and egalitarianism and race and gender and sexuality and wealth distribution. And these debates have always been a seesaw, have always been a back and forth. Um, And right now we're coming out of a period of probably about 40 years in which there's kind of this idea of retrenchment and individualism and pulling yourself up from your bootstraps and being dependent upon yourself and only yourself, which I think is a false, which is a myth. All of us are dependent. Um, and it's starting to come to a head. I think we're experiencing a society that is undergoing a lot of changes, demographic changes, cultural changes. I think there are folks in society that are very fearful of these changes, and in many cases, some of them have kind of gotten the short end of these changes. Deindustrialization, right? The idea of somebody just being able to go out and work hard and work for the mill for 30 years and then retire with a pension and be able to afford that house with the picket fence and send their kids to college. Those days are gone. Those days are gone. That's not a good thing. So how are we going to deal with that? So there is a lot of insecurity right now. Some of that is economic insecurity. We can't rule that out. We don't really know what jobs are going to disappear next year and forever, and what jobs are going to be created. And if the jobs that are created, what if I'm not qualified to do those jobs? That's scary. That's scary stuff. And is my place in society secure? We're going through cultural changes where especially white males in our society are fearful of losing their place in society. And I don't think that's something to be scoffed at. And I don't think they necessarily. I don't think it's necessarily a bad. The changes that they're facing are necessarily a bad thing, but they're scary things. And when people respond in fear, they also tend to respond in anger and hatred. And that is just the reality of our period of time. It will get better. we will emerge out of this, and then maybe we'll start to see some more progress in human tolerance. It has to happen. It simply has to happen. And another thing we have to remember is that every period in time has its challenges. Every period in time has its it's puzzles to put together. It's wars to fight. It's pandemics to deal with. It's droughts. Every period in time has its challenges, and then it's just a matter of, well, how are we facing those challenges? What are we doing to face these challenges? And there's no difference between that and other periods in time. So is the country going in a good direction, or is it going in a bad direction? Honestly, from my perspective, I look out and I have the benefit of being around a lot of very, very bright young people. And from my perspective and what I see, I really, really feel very optimistic about our future. And the reason why I feel optimistic about our future is because of you young people who are hopefully watching this video right now. I think from my interactions with you, and I've been doing this for a long time, more than a quarter of a century, going on 30 years working with young people, and I can honestly say that every generation of young people that I've worked on has gotten better and better and better, has been more open-minded, more tolerant, more focused on inclusion, and have a greater grasp and understanding of how we are all, maybe because you're a networked generation, automatically you have an understanding that you are connected to the outside world in ways that my generation really didn't have. You guys can go online and be connected with somebody on the other side of the world instantaneously. That creates an amazing, panoply of view that no other generation in the history of the world has ever had. So I'm actually, from my perspective, I think that we are. I'm optimistic. That being said, we do there are some challenges that we do need to face. I think one of those challenges is the hit that the small d democratic movement has taken in the last few years. I think another big problem is going to be global warming and global climate change. So I think those are probably our two. And look, the reality is those nuclear weapons are still out there. So that's, I think, a problem. I think some of the things that you guys are going to have to face is how do we make in a global society that we have, how do we make sure that everybody in the world actually feels included? Up until this point, and up into this point, we've seen an element of the world that benefits and an element of the world that is victim of extraction and exclusion and exploitation. And I don't think that's a sustainable system for very much longer. And it's going to be up to your generation to figure out how do we make these global systems work in a way that is globally beneficial. But I think you'll do it. Or at least I think you're going to make the steps that'll take us in the right direction. But history is never a linear, progressive arrow moving from, barbarism to civilization. It's just never worked that way. It has always been a pendulum. It has always been a jagged line. It's always been one step forward, two steps forward, one step back, one step forward, two steps back. Martin Luther King referred to it as an arc of history, but I don't think it is even that neat. But I do think he was correct that it does bend toward justice, and I think you guys are going to be better situated than even my generation was. Childhood trauma on adolescents and adults. I've been witness to a lot of this stuff. I've had to deal with, in my career, I've had to deal with an awful lot of childhood trauma, and I've also had to experience how that trauma sometimes translates into adulthood and how we deal with things as adults. It's tough. The effects of childhood look, this is a huge topic. So I'm going to try to narrow it down. I'm going to try to bring it down to the sociology. One of the things I do have to say here is I didn't script any of these answers, so I didn't go through and just write down the things that I wanted to write about and outline it. My goal was to just read the questions as I was doing the video and answer extemporaneously. This one is a tough one to do that for, because look, the effects of childhood trauma on adolescents and adults is, you could write books on this topic, and oftentimes they're different and varied and that kind of thing. What I will say, to try to narrow this down into maybe the core sociology of this, is, look, there is, if you as an individual, when individuals have strong social supports, strong cultural ties, meaningful and substantial relationships with other people, healthy relationships with other people, then they are in a much, much better position to deal with trauma, whether that's childhood trauma, trauma that happens during adolescence, or adult trauma. There really isn't anything more beneficial to human health, mental, psychological, social, emotional, physical health, than good, solid, meaningful relationships with other people. Those are the things that hold us together. And one of the things that I hope my students of sociology learn is that there's really nothing more fragile than the isolated human being. So what I would say is, when it comes to childhood trauma that tends to happen in isolation and tends to result in the perpetuation of isolation of that individual is going to be hugely destructive. Childhood trauma that takes place in the presence of caring, meaningful relationships, especially caring, meaningful relationships with adults who can help, who can provide support. Those people, as they go into adolescence and adulthood, are probably going to be okay. The scar tissue is going to be there. There's going to be something there. Nobody gets through this life without some of that scar tissue, but you're going to be better affected to deal with those traumas if you have that community around you. So what I would suggest is building that community, building those connections, building those relationships. And that, I think, is a real problem right now. Right now in our society, I think this kind of harkens back to our last question. I think one of the challenges that your generation is really going to face is going to have to do with the nature of your relationships. Because right now, we have a system in place by which we can have very, very efficient networks and very, very efficient relationships with other people. We can communicate with other people in ways that we were never able to do before. But unfortunately, with systems in place that help increase the quantity and efficiency of our relationships and our networks and our connections, doesn't necessarily translate into quality networks and connections and relationships. And I think that's a huge problem. I think that we're seeing that with young people who are experiencing, well, the stressors of a changing society and the stressors of an uncertain future, and they have these networks that are set up that are not necessarily meaningful relationships. So despite the fact that we're networked in ways that we've never been networked before, I think young people especially are increasingly feeling a sense of isolation because the quality of those relationships aren't there. So for dealing with childhood trauma or any kind of trauma, whether it's, I don't necessarily know why we have to differentiate between childhood trauma and adult trauma. Trauma is trauma. But to deal with that, the best way to do that is to form those meaningful relationships, which may also mean going out there and actually talking to people, you know what I mean? And finding people to talk to, even and especially if those people are trained professionals who can help you make sense of the traumas that have happened in your world, in your society, in your life, socially, and help you build those connections. That really is, I think it's key, and it's something that's sorely missing from our particular culture right now, which tends to emphasize go it alone, individualism, pull yourself up by the bootstraps, which of course is impossible to do. And that's just not the way human beings work. Human beings work collaboratively. We are cooperative. We're a cooperative species. We're a social species. We need other people. Human beings need other people. People in isolation are fragile. People in isolation will break down. Human beings need other people. So I'll leave it at that. Hopefully that answers this particular question. And this, well, it's funny. Now I listed these questions in the order that I received them, so I didn't reorganize them again. I'm doing this extemporaneously, but it's kind of funny how this question I think kind of relates to the previous question. Do I think virtual school will continue to be a thing? It's going to be a thing, but what kind of a thing is it going to be? I don't know. But we have learned an awful lot about the infrastructure of doing virtual school and Home Connect and all of this other kind of stuff. So I think we're going to make use of our knowledge. I think we're going to make use of the lessons that we've learned during this pandemic with regard to virtual school, and hopefully, man, I'd love to see it open up possibilities for people. Wouldn't that be great? I mean, wouldn't it be great? open up a classroom to a virtual audience, and how do we do that? I think there's a lot of really great things that we can do with the idea of virtual school, and that we're just scratching the surface on. I do think it's going to be a thing, but are we going to be doing like the kind of hybrid classrooms? I don't. That's probably not going to happen, because one of the things that this pandemic has taught us is, as related to the first question, human beings need other human beings. Students need other students. Students need to have that face-to-face interaction. They need to have those human connections that come with actually being in school and interacting with other kids, having meaningful relationships with knowledgeable adults. So I think we're concerned that eventually we would just YouTube learning, and I think and then we would just replace all the teachers with with professional media people who can do a really cool YouTube video on sociology, and then just have paraprofessionals in the classroom or whatever, making sure that everything was okay, or just video. I don't think we're going to have that issue. I think we've learned the values of public spaces for education, which is public school. So I think the pandemic, if nothing else, did a lot to reaffirm the value of that particular space. But what are the possibilities? What are some of the possibilities that can come about because of virtual schooling and being able to open your classroom in ways that we've never done it before? I think that's going to be really fascinating. Hopefully, it's done in a way that is small d democratic, that increases the amount of freedom for both teachers and students, and opens possibilities rather than opens responsibilities, which is usually pretty oppressive. So I think some variation of virtual school, Home Connect, is always going to exist. We're going to probably have to renegotiate some of the norms associated with that. But yeah, I think it's going to be a part of our lives. But will it replace in-person, face-to-face schooling? I don't think so. At least I hope not. So we'll see. So ways to further economic education. So I guess this is from one of my students. Without the trauma of going through college. I'll open this up to not just economic education, but to any kind of education. Look, there are these things, they're really, really cool. They're called public libraries. And they're really neat. You can go there, and they have lots and lots of books, and you can go and find a book that you like and that you're interested in, and then you can take it home for free. They're cool, right? And all you have to do is bring it back. And if you bring it back late, there's a little bit of a fee, but that's about it. So if you really want to further your education, become friends with your local library. There's one of my favorite authors, Ray Bradbury, said that when he was asked, he said he didn't believe in college, but he did believe in public libraries. Because that is probably the most democratic, means of furthering your education on anything. So if you want to further your education on economics, sociology, history, whatever, everything is right there at your fingertips. The most important thing is to make sure that you're finding sources that are valid and reliable sources of information, and that you're not. Look, it's like having a good diet. If you fill your body with crap, if you fill your body with empty calories and sugars and feel-good trans fats and stuff like that, then you're probably going to be sated and satisfied, but your body systems will ultimately break down. The same is going to be true with regard to furthering your education. You want to go and make sure that you're filling your mind with good healthy proteins and carbs and fruits and veggies, and getting the right number of vitamins and minerals so that your mind actually becomes stronger. If you fill your mind with junk food, with candy that makes you feel good and gets you fired up, then you're not going to be a particularly knowledgeable person. You're not going to be a particularly educated person. That's one of the benefits of going to college or going to university, is that you can interact with people who have already gone through that process and know how they're kind of like your nutritionists and your personal trainers, right? They can help you, consume the right foods and help you exercise in the right ways that help sharpen your mind. So finding those public libraries, finding those public spaces is great, but also if you want to further your education, find people who know what they're talking about. Find people who've already gone through the process and talk to them. The beauty of that is now with online communication, we can find those people and we can link up. So on the Mr. Andoscia's Classroom page, I have a bunch of links that have blogs that are put out by economists if you're interested in economics, or by sociologists if you're interested in sociology, and you can go on there and take a look at the stuff that they're saying and doing. And there's always the possibility of emailing them and establishing networks with those folks. That would be my recommendation. College is great. I'm a firm believer in college for those reasons, for the fact that you can go there and get access to knowledge and perspectives that you otherwise don't get, that it's more difficult to get access to. But college isn't the only way to do that. When people are coming to your town to speak, go and see them. If professors open their classrooms to being audited, you can go and participate. I know when I was teaching college, I didn't care who came into my room. If you wanted to learn sociology, you were welcome to come into my classroom. So it didn't matter to me. So find those professors who are interested in that. Form the networks with economists. Find an economist and establish, if that's what you're interested in, find that and do the research. So that's what I would suggest. And that should do the trick. So go to the MrAndosciasClassroom.net and you can take a look at those at the blog sites. They'll be pretty good sources of information, and have fun. All right, well, that's it. That's all of the questions. I had a lot of fun, and let's see now. Again, I'm using a new camera, so I'm wondering how this is going to work. I don't know now. I hope I actually recorded all of these things. So hopefully within a couple of days I'll have some stuff for you. So in the meantime, it was fun, and enjoy, and maybe some of you I'll see again next semester. If not, you know how to reach me, and take care.